Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you. You bring a tremendous amount of experience and wisdom to the table, and we really appreciate that. And I think it seems like the more we hear, the more confused it becomes of how we approach this. I'm concerned about basically since 9/11, you know, and that's basically the start of what most people think in America started our engagement over in that area, and I'm sure it started many years before that. And this thing has been brewing for quite some time. But with that being said, 9/11 seems to be the start of it. So all three of you, being afforded the hindsight being 2020, what's the greatest mistake that we have made as a country since 9/11? Just as quickly as you can, because my concern that we have now is that, as Mr. Gordon, you had said that, you know, with even our allies, and I think as Ambassador Croker had said, that they're not willing to fight on the ground. They're not willing to take the fight on the ground. So if we don't do it, it doesn't look like it's going to be done. And we've proven that we've been there, and it didn't seem to stabilize that area, because as soon as we pulled out, it was falling apart. So if you could just give me an oversight very quickly on the greatest mistake and the simplest direction forward, that we could not repeat that mistake again.
Well, I had it in my testimony. I mean, I fundamentally believe that the singular strategic mistake that we've made is not to develop a strategy dealing with radical Islam and not just focus on one particular group, and embrace the intellectual challenge that this ideology presents to us, embrace it politically, but embrace it in terms of what we need to do financially and economically and what we must do militarily, and bring people together, nations together, to have a common invested interest in this and deal with it. There's going to be something after ISIS. We will defeat ISIS. There is going to be something after ISIS that will threaten our national interest in the Middle East or someplace else that's going to get us involved and concerned, and we're going to have meetings about it, and people follow me in here and telling you how to deal with that problem. And that is the singular problem I see, that we have not faced up to this issue strategically to deal with radical Islam itself and stop. While we have to stop and defeat ISIS, as we had to stop and defeat the al-Qaeda senior leadership in Pakistan, until we deal with a comprehensive strategy, we're going to find ourselves in the same situation we are now with ISIS. This is a generational problem. We have to understand it for that and take a page out of the 20th century and how we dealt with communist ideology, forming NATO and CETO, common political and military alliances, to come together to deal with a common problem.
Ambassador Crocker.
Senator, that is a profound question. I thought a lot about it. I opened our embassy in Afghanistan shortly after the fall of the Taliban. The force on the ground then was 5th Special Forces Group, the CIA, and 1 Marine Expeditionary Unit. That was it.
That was after 9. That was
after 9/11.
Yeah.
The Pentagon at that time was absolutely opposed to introducing any more forces to help Karzai secure cities outside of Kabul. I think the biggest mistake we made is not understanding the reach of time and the resilience of those who are our adversaries. I had my
first... You would
first...
think, but just watching what happened with Russia being there for 10 years, we would have had some insight of the resilience these people have.
Which may have been behind the thinking of the Pentagon at the time for not wanting additional forces. So we kept our force footprint down. And, of course, our resilient enemy came at us, as it subsequently did in Iraq. Different enemy, but same league. So it's a way of saying there aren't any easy answers. It's hard to say. I mean, I will not go to the extreme position of saying that the overthrow of the Taliban and the expulsion of al-Qaeda was a mistake. As an American, I cannot bring myself to say that. After
declaring war in Iraq?
I'm coming to the mistakes. but Afghanistan is worth spending some time on, because hard to argue that we shouldn't have taken military action after what came to us out of Afghanistan. But the mistake, if there was one, was not understanding that you can't kill them all, and that the effort to create a strong, stable state in Afghanistan probably wasn't going to happen. So then what? In Iraq, Senator, I learned maybe two things during almost 40 years in the Middle East. I thought one lesson every couple of decades was a pace I could sustain. So the first lesson is be careful what you get into in the Middle East. And the first time I learned that lesson was in Lebanon, 1982, Israeli invasion. We all thought it was a good idea, get rid of the PLO. Well, we got rid of the PLO, and we got Hezbollah. And we got a chain of events that led to the bombing of my embassy with me in it and the bombing of the Marine barracks. Be careful what you get into. But the second thing I learned is be just as careful what you propose to get out of. That disengagement can have consequences as great or greater as engagement. And I would suggest to you we didn't follow those lessons at all well, either of them, in Iraq.
Mr. Chairman, can Mr. Gordon just give us what he thinks the greatest mistake? Mr. Gordon, thank you. Thank you, Ambassador.
I agree. It's a profound question, a hard question, and I'd say with the greatest respect, it may not even be a helpful question because we should be reluctant because of these complexities to identify single things. I think many would argue, if you had to identify a single thing, that it would be the Iraq War, not just because of the financial and human costs, but because it tipped the strategic balance in the region and put Iran in charge in Iraq. It led to Sunni disempowerment, which is partly fueling the al-Qaeda in Iraq and then ISIS. It made the U.S. public wary of our engagement in the Middle East, and arguably even over-wary. So we're not willing to do things that arguably we should. But I think we have to acknowledge that for every mistake of action, there would have been costs of inaction too. So even I'm not willing to say that that's the greatest single mistake, because had we not done it, we might be sitting here talking about the mistake of leaving Saddam Hussein in power. So that's why I'm reluctant to identify single things. I've pointed out elsewhere that when you think back about the region in Iraq, we intervened and occupied, and it turned out very badly. In Libya, we intervened but didn't occupy, and it has turned out very badly. And in Syria, we neither intervened nor occupied, and it has turned out very badly. I think the lesson of that is just overall caution that there is some single answer or model for how we should deal with these problems, again, has been said. So I would say there's not a single mistake, just there's not a single answer for what we should do going forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.